Well, if you watched my review of Denis Villeneuve's Dune, then you already know I'm not a fan. Part 1 felt pretty faithful to the source, but was far too boring, and Part 2 was more entertaining, but diverges from the source in ways I don't like at all. I left my review spoiler free, but now I want to talk about the specifics of why this adaptation just doesn't work for me, and how it compares to David Lynch's Dune. If at this point you still haven't seen it, this will be a fairly spoiler heavy video, so consider yourself warned. Now, this was meant to be a relatively simple video where I was going to go into the specifics on everything I found to be bad or wrong with Denis Villeneuve's Dune Parts 1 and 2, and how it compared to Dune 84, one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, I was going step by step, inch by inch, comparing the overall look, all the different characters, all the different actors, all the different ships and weapons. And the more I thought about it, the more I began to realize that none of that stuff was what was bugging me. Not really. Sure, I don't like any of the new stuff, except for that sexy Harkonnen spice harvester. Come to daddy. But that's all kinda superfluous, and I've never been so mad about a movie's look or the way its vehicles are designed that I would rewrite a video script about it 4 damn times. So what the hell was it really that was eating at me about this movie? Because something clearly was. Forget the garnish. I only want the meat of it because that's all that matters. And I figured it out. Chani and a very stupid decision Paul makes do not make sense to me in this movie, and it drives me up a wall. When I went back and listened to my review, I realized I was kind of holding New Dune to a standard that I wasn't holding Dune 84 to, and that ain't really fair. That standard being faithfulness to the source material. Both movies wind up diverging pretty heavily from the books by their conclusions, although something I would like people to finally acknowledge, especially its most ardent detractors, is that Dune 84 is about as faithful to its source as I think an adaptation can possibly be without being a word-for-word retelling. And I will defend that statement anytime, anywhere. And you know what? New Dune is about as faithful as you can get too. Now, before I get into why New Dune doesn't work for me, I want to be clear on where I stand on adaptations, and that's this. All adaptations diverge from their source. And if you're looking for the source, the whole source, and nothing but the source, then just read the damn source. If you're not gonna be okay with an adaptation taking some liberties, if that's your biggest peeve, then stay away from them, because none of them are gonna make you happy, you grumble puss. Adaptations are not the source, and slavish faithfulness to the source does not always make for a good adaptation. Hell, sometimes the source sucks and the adaptation blows it out of the water. For instance, I think Blade Runner is way better than Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, but it also has almost nothing to do with the book. It says based on in the credits, but it should really only say inspired by, because outside of some shared names and a few concepts, they couldn't be more different. If they'd just changed the names of the characters, they might have gotten away with not having to pay Philip K. Dick's estate a damn thing. Similarly, Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, is also better than the original novel, but unlike Blade Runner, it's really damn faithful to the book, aside from the whole reincarnated lover thing, which I actually really like. Dracula the novel was an absolute slog for me to get through. Coppola's movie tells the same story better and more efficiently, just with some added bits. And Monica Bellucci's amazing breasts. Those make everything better. Dune is an adaptation of what is, from what I've read, the best-selling science fiction novel of all time. And one of the main reasons people will dump on a film adaptation of a book, justly or unjustly, is due to it deviating from the source material, or doing it in a way they don't like, especially if the source is as beloved as Dune. Now, the latter criticism is fair, but the former is not. It's not fair to criticize an adaptation for deviating from the source. Every adaptation ever ever made has deviated from the source because it has to. What is fair to criticize is how or how much an adaptation deviates, because that's either a matter of your own personal taste, maybe they cut a part you really like or added something you don't, or if an adaptation strays too far from the source, then it's no longer an adaptation based on the work, it's its own thing that is inspired by it at most. Or it could be a shameless, disrespectful cash grab banking on a popular name, like The Rings of Power or pretty much every Disney movie to come out in the last decade. The truth is, no matter how good a movie adaptation is, you will never please all the fans because there's always someone's favorite part that explains so much and should have been in the movie, but it isn't, and therefore the movie is trash. But as I said, movie adaptations have to deviate from the source. There are things that work in one medium that just don't work in others. Something that works on the page, for instance, multiple paragraphs of world-building exposition, don't really translate too well to a visual medium like movies where time is far more limited. So, things have to be changed. Multiple characters might have to be combined into a single one or omitted altogether. But there are other metrics that stories have to be measured by regardless of whether they're adaptations or completely original works. And one of those is, does the story make sense? Does it follow its own logic? Does a story establish a set of rules and follow them, or does it break them? Do the characters behave the way they logically should according to how those characters are written? Now, obviously, a story doesn't have to follow the really real world's rules. Plenty of stories out there are full of magic, impossible machines, superpowers, what have you. But a story has to establish a set of rules that it sticks to in order for audiences to suspend their disbelief and buy into the world they're being shown. As a pretty poor example off the top of my head, if a story sets up that the people in this world cannot fly, you can't have a character suddenly fly up to rescue a child dangling from a balcony. Or if a character is a pacifist, let's say due to past traumas, you can't have that person simply choosing to go all Punisher on the bad guys as plan A, because that runs contrary to their character. Everything in the story's world, characters included, has to behave logically according to that world's established rules. Just as a quick aside, if you want the most faithful screen adaptation of Dune, watch the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries from 2000. Whatever anyone wants to say about that series, I really like it. It is undeniably the most faithful to the book, and it deserves more love both for its faithfulness and for its sheer ambition with its relatively low budget. Hats off to you, Sci-Fi Channel Dune. Now, as I said, both Dune 84 and New Dune deviate from their source, that's true. But, like it or not, Dune 84 does so in a way that does not break the rules it establishes, story or character-wise. So what are Dune 84's biggest deviations? Well, first and least is its portrayal of the weirding way. I know a lot of fans of the book don't like the weirding modules in the 84 movie, but I'm gonna defend these much maligned devices. In the book, the weirding way is not a weapon, it's a sort of martial art. A master of the weirding way can move so fast that, to their opponent, it looks almost as if they're teleporting. Paul and Jessica teach this technique to the Fremen to turn them into unstoppable hand-to-hand killing machines. In the 84 movie, the weirding way is replaced by weirding modules, which are weapons that can turn certain sounds into powerful sonic blasts. Paul and Jessica teach the Fremen how to build them and basically achieve the same results as the book. While I do like the book's version of the weirding a little better, I don't hate the movie's sonic guns. Lynch didn't want to show, as he referred to it, kung fu on the sand dunes, so the weirding modules were created instead. Maybe this change was also made due to special effects and budget limitations of the time. How, in 1984, do you show a massive hand-to-hand battle where half the guys are moving normally while the other half are blinking around the battlefield? How do you even choreograph that? Pyrotechnics and animated pew-pews are way easier and cheaper to do. Also, there's nothing in Dune 84, or even the book that I could find, that would suggest that these sound guns wouldn't work, so even though they don't exist in the books, they're perfectly fine within the confines of Dune 84, the movie. Now, this is just my theory, but they might actually make a lot of sense too. In Dune, shields have rendered conventional firearms nearly useless, and lasers are too dangerous to use due to the catastrophic results of a laser hitting a shield. So, a new type of weapon that can fire a non-physical projectile, a sonic blast, that shields can't stop could be a game changer. If I'm missing something and I'm wrong on that, someone let me know. Now, the second and most controversial change Dune 84 makes is its ending. Dune 84 ends at the completion of the first book, and by that I mean it ends, as in this is the end of the story that David Lynch is telling with his movie, full stop. There's nothing to come after it. No adaptations of any of the other books, nothing about Paul and Chani's children, nothing about what happens with Paul's sister Alia, nothing about the universe-spanning Holy War, nothing. Paul defeats the Emperor, he brings the reins to Arrakis. I rest the reins down in Arrakis. The movie ends on a high note and everyone lives happily ever after. I fully understand why fans of the book don't like this ending, because this is not the message Frank Herbert intended to convey with Dune. Paul in this movie is more like Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, in that he brings with him an age of peace and prosperity, whereas in Herbert's book, Paul ushers in some fairly dark times, what with the Fremen going apeshit all across the known universe in his name. Herbert's message was that worshiping a man as a god has dire consequences. Things might work out in the short term, but it will all eventually turn to shit, and that's a message I fully agree with. Human beings are not infallible, should never be expected to be infallible, and should never be revered as if they are anything more than fallible humans. Good message. The reason I don't hate the ending of Dune 84, I actually like it, is that it works pretty good as an ending to a story. Remember, there was no sequel, and an open ending setting one up would have just made it feel incomplete. Plus, it's technically source faithful. Arrakis does eventually get terraformed. But there's nothing that the movie itself sets up that this ending would contradict. So while it may not be faithful to the source, and you may not like it, it doesn't break any of its own rules. So it makes sense. Rip to all those sandworms though, haha. Dune 84 also had to tell its entire story within the span of a single movie, and going into all the things Herbert got into later in his books just wouldn't fit. I mean, it already has a pretty rushed pace from trying to cram as much of the book as it does into its 2-hour and 17-minute runtime. Had Lynch gotten 2 movies, things probably would have been a bit different. But he didn't. He only had 1 movie, so he had to end it in a way that brought that story to a satisfying close. So Dune 84 is not the story of a young boy's rise to power gone wrong, it's the story of a young boy's rise to power that, hey, worked out for everybody in the end. Again, you might not like it, and that's fine, but it makes sense. I can hear you now. Oh my God, we get it. You love David Lynch's Dune. Will you shut up about it already and get to the part where you trash a movie that literally the entire world is in love with, you bitter little contrarian? All right. Now, first and foremost, I want to say that I do not think Denis Villeneuve is approaching Dune in bad faith. That's one thing I can't abide and I will get angry about. Talentless hacks who demean and disrespect the works of those who came before them and who show utter contempt for the fans of those works. I will call bullshit when characters and stories I have loved my whole life get treated like garbage. But that isn't what Denis Villeneuve is doing here. No, I don't like his version, and I don't like where it seems to be going, but he's just doing the same thing that Lynch did with Dune 84. He's telling the basic story while making what he feels are necessary changes in order to end that story within the confines of a movie trilogy. And let's face it, y'all, the entire saga of Dune would need more than 1, 2, or even 3 movies to tell. It needs 5 or 6, or a big budget TV show with several seasons like Game of Thrones, just to cover the books Frank Herbert wrote. One movie, or even trilogy, was never going to cover everything from all the books, so both adaptations had to make changes in order to tell a complete story within their allotted runtimes. Now, New Dune starts out and mostly stays pretty faithful to the book. Most of what I mentioned Dune 84 getting right is also in New Dune. New Dune completely omits any mention or use of the weirding in any form whatsoever. Fine, not a huge deal, but it does hint at the Fremen jihad that sweeps through the universe as a result of Paul's ascension to demigodhood, which is more in line with Herbert's intentions. Villeneuve's adaptation also makes changes to several characters and events like Paul's sister Alia, Lady Fenring, and especially, and in my mind most egregiously, Chani. Villeneuve is telling the story of a young man who becomes a people's messiah and loses control of both himself and his followers. Chani was worried that this might happen. Hell, Paul was too. But while Paul comes to see it as a cruel necessity, Chani doesn't. She's also tired of her people being pawns in other people's games and wants her people to be free, not just to be under the heel of another oppressor, even if that oppressor seems like a decent guy. I mean, I could do a whole video on just these ideas alone because I don't disagree with them at all. So I get all that, and that's all fine and good. But while both Dune 84 and New Dune deviate from the books in order to tell their own stories, Dune 84, like I said, say what you want about it, doesn't break its own rules to do so, while New Dune does. And that's what I can't stand about it. Forget the look, the special effects, the performances, the soundtrack. Forget the book. Take it out of the equation completely. Chani's character makes no logical sense to me according to this movie's own rules. Let's get into it. In the book, Chani is not ultra skeptical of Paul or the prophecy. She's down with it. Okay, fine. That's the book. Just putting that in there so you know. In New Dune, what I do not understand is where Chani's hyper-skepticism of the prophecy comes from in the first place. I know she's from the North, and it's the Southerners who are the hardline fundamentalists, but she's lived her entire life in a secluded society on a secluded planet with not a whole lot going on besides the spice harvesting and the fighting, and the Fremen don't have a whole lot of contact with the rest of the universe, if any at all. For hundreds of years, the Bene Gesserit have been sowing the seeds of prophecy. Manipulation is what they do, and they do it well. And the Fremen have been eating it up, both the Southerners and the Northerners. So Chani was born and raised in a culture that believes 100% that the Lisan al-Gaib will come and make Dune a green paradise. The only disagreement between the two is on who it might be, an outsider or a natural-born Fremen. She would have been taught these beliefs from birth, same as any other Fremen. So, in an ultra-exclusive, ultra-secluded, ultra-religious society that keeps itself pretty much cut off from the rest of the universe. Remember, these are people who spend their whole lives in hiding, and they're so good at it that even the most advanced societies in the known universe have been for centuries unable to accurately quantify just how many of them there actually are. In that type of society, where she would have been raised in the norms and traditions that the Fremen have been passing down for generations, where was New Dune's Chani getting her alternate source of information that would have her questioning everything her people believe? What is she reading or watching that has her so unconvinced that there even is a Messiah at all? We see that she has a group of friends who are at first also skeptical of Paul, but when he starts displaying his abilities that are unique in all the universe to him, her friends jump on board with it, but not her. Oh no, she remains absolutely rigid in her disbelief. I just don't buy it. It's too unbelievable. Usually when someone breaks away from a belief system or a society, it's because they have access to information that starts to cast doubts on that way of life. But I don't see any evidence that she has this alternative info source, or any info source for that matter, because if she did, wouldn't she have used it to look up what an ocean was, since all the Fremen are water obsessed? Do the Fremen have libraries where she could learn about other philosophies or about the Bene Gesserit manipulation? If there is, let me know. Also, when Paul drinks the water of life and he's in a coma, Chani literally brings him back to life with her tears, just like the prophecy, and she still doesn't believe it. And yeah, I know the whole thing is a setup by the Bene Gesserits, and Jessica uses the voice on her, which Chani snaps out of pretty quickly too, but magical stuff is actually happening. Her tears do wake Paul up. Paul is reading people's minds, talking about that one guy's one-eyed grandma that he'd have no way of knowing about. Paul is seeing into the future. Alia, who isn't even born yet, is communicating with her mother and her brother. So it isn't all just superstitious hogwash and Bene Gesserit chicanery. There is real, unexplainable stuff going on. And not only that, but in one of the stupidest, most cliche scenes, when Paul wakes up from his coma, after Chani asks him if he's okay, I guess this is done for comedic effect, she slaps him. While she's surrounded by dozens of his armed and dangerous true believers, she slaps the Lisan al-Gaib. Would they have let anyone lay a hand on their Messiah and get away with it? Zealots don't act like that. Go draw a picture of Muhammad. Go talk shit about Xi Jinping in China. You'll find out what zealots act like. Paul does everything right according to the prophecy the Fremen believe in. He knows how to wear a still suit without being shown. He can survive in the desert. He has visions. He calls the biggest sandworm anyone's ever seen and rides it on his first try. All the Bene Gesserit manipulation in the universe couldn't do that. That is all him. So again, where does Chani's ironclad skepticism come from? It makes zero logical sense for her to be like that. And she's literally the only one, as if out of all the millions and millions of Fremen, only this lone teenager was somehow gifted with Arrakis's most highly advanced bullshit detector. Give me a break. Now, I'm not saying Chani's wrong, or that Paul should be portrayed as the love and light hero who makes everything sunshine and rainbows. I'm saying there's no way Chani would not believe in him herself. Yes, she is portrayed differently than in the book, but that doesn't matter. For the 50th or 60th time, her unassailable skepticism breaks the rules that this movie alone establishes. She makes no sense. Also, Paul not explaining to Chani why he's marrying Irulan is weak and lazy. It was a stupid decision on Villeneuve's part that makes zero sense. Paul does not love Irulan at all. He would have explained to little pouty-faced Chani that the marriage is just a political one and that she's still his one and only. That's a thing that the Paul of this movie would have absolutely done, period. But Villeneuve needed Chani to ride off all mad so she can square off with Paul in the sequel, so let's just make Paul behave in complete contradiction to his own character. Like I said, I understand what Denis Villeneuve is doing. I understand why he's doing it, and since the story needs to wrap up by the end of the third movie, I agree that he needs to do it. I just don't agree with how he's doing it. It's like he knows where he wants his story to go, so he's willing to have his characters defy logic in order to force his conclusion to happen. Chani makes no sense. Paul not talking to Chani about his political marriage makes no sense. sense. There had to be another way to get the story where he wants it to go without these two overwhelmingly glaring anomalies. My prediction is that Paul will only get worse, his power will corrupt him further, and Chani will kill Paul because of what he's become, the way Jon Snow killed Daenerys in the awesome 8th season of Game of Thrones. I really hope it doesn't go there because it's so predictable and boring, but as Ballo says,
I got a bad feeling about this.
I think this'll come to pass. I just don't see how Paul and Chani can reconcile enough to get back together in a way that makes sense, and I honestly don't think that's what Villeneuve intends to have happen. Are Paul and Chani's children, Ghanima and Leto II, gonna be in this version? Maybe Chani's already pregnant with Paul's children, and that's how she'll carry on with the best part of him after he's dead. I don't know. Paul and Chani's kids are as up in the air as anything at this point, so while I can see that happening, I can also see Villeneuve leaving them out completely. Like I said, he's got to end this story in a way that's satisfying to the story he's trying to tell and the idea he's trying to get across. I also worry that the power corrupts theme might be handled half-assedly, and where Paul can't handle the power, Alia will be able to just fine. I really hope Villeneuve doesn't go there. I'm gonna make a prediction though that I hope is wrong, that Villeneuve is gonna scrap the power corrupts message for a power corrupts this guy over here, but this gal over here can handle it just fine. Power corrupts, period. Or, as Frank Herbert himself put it, all governments suffer a recurring problem. Power attracts pathological personalities. It is not that power corrupts, but that it's magnetic to the corruptible. Whichever way you want to word it, that's as true as it gets, and I hope Villeneuve doesn't stray from that at least. So yeah, this one just ain't my bag. All the little things like the looks and sounds don't really bug me at the end of the day. And Villeneuve changing things isn't the problem. I just can't make Chani's and Paul's behavior make sense, and that irks me to no end. But you know what? As I said earlier, I don't think Villeneuve is a bad actor on this, or that he's disrespecting Dune or Frank Herbert. He's trying to basically get Dune's story and idea across within the span of 3 movies, and if he doesn't do it flawlessly, then oh well. When all's said and done, this is just an adaptation that doesn't work for me, and apparently me alone. But it's not like anything was taken from me. I can still read the book or watch the vastly superior Lynch adaptation, and meanwhile everyone else can enjoy this new version. It's not a case of Coke versus New Coke, where Coca-Cola was gonna be phased out. It's a case of Coke versus Pepsi. It just comes down to which one do you prefer. Everyone can pick their favorite and everyone wins. So if you've made it this far, let me just say thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please go ahead and leave a like and a comment. If I got something wrong, throw it in the comments below. Let me have it. So until the rains come back to Arrakis, you glorious Fedaykin and Fedaykets, adios. The big thing is, I hope Chani doesn't kill Jon Snow like Paul and Daenerys. Yep.